Yeah, just making sure.
Perfect. Yeah, no problem at all. In this Impact International, I was checking the website a little bit and the Twitter, and yeah, more interested in human rights cases and studies. It's really interesting. And nowadays, it's like, again in front page of every newspaper. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, we're ready to go in a minute. Bear with us. Thanks. Thanks for your time.
Okay, perfect.
Welcome everyone to Impact International's latest webinar. We've had a very interesting topic that we'll be discussing with Carlos Gomez Gonzalez, who's a doctor at the University of Zurich, and he is an expert in sports economics, sports management and discrimination studies, and he's co-author of an extremely interesting report that's really piqued our interest at Impact International. And this report is about mapping discrimination in Europe through a field experiment in amateur sport. Now, a little bit about Impact International. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, and our website and YouTube, where this video will also be made available. And of course, it's currently being simulcast to our Facebook group as well. And these are all can be found online under Impact Policies. So go online, check us out on Twitter, Facebook, check out our website and YouTube channel at Impact Policies. Now, we have this report, which is about mapping discrimination in Europe through a field experiment in amateur sport. That's indeed the title of this report. And now I'll go over to Dr. Carlos Gomez Gonzalez, who of course will speak to us about his findings and what he's found about sport in Europe and levels of discrimination through an absolutely comprehensive and groundbreaking study. Dr. Carlos Gomez Gonzalez, over to you.
Right. Thank you very much for the invitation to you and to the Impact community. It's really a pleasure to be here and to talk about this research. I will talk about our study and our findings, and then we can have maybe a little discussion about the implications and the results. I will share now my screen, and I also wanted to tell you that if you want to stop me at any time during the presentation, that is totally fine, especially at the time when I will explain a little bit about the experiment and what we do. That's probably a good idea. If there's something that is not clear and a step that you would like me to clarify, please absolutely feel free to stop me. Indeed, this is a study that I did with two colleagues of mine, Cornel Nasla. He's a doctor also at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway, and with Helmut Dietl. He's a professor here at the University of Zurich. And we did this study. You will see our motivation. This was to get an idea of how discrimination could impact sports, and especially amateur sports. And this is the first step. Afterwards, we would like to move on and try to find solutions to this problem. I like starting this type of presentations with this picture. If I would ask any of you where we are, where this picture was taken, it's pretty difficult to guess especially if we would omit some of these details like the Celsius or like some of this info that we can read here. And this is because societies are becoming more and more diverse. If you ask me, this is a good thing. And indeed, there are cities and countries that have many members that came from other places, other countries, other cities. And these days, sadly, there's more forced migration that we would like to, but there are also people that choose to go to different country and to work there and to have the time there. And how we integrate these people in our societies is a great challenge, right? Today, the number of people in our societies that come from different countries are up to 10% in Europe. So this is a huge number, and we cannot afford to discriminate against these people. But despite these numbers and despite the positive implications of integration, there is plenty of evidence that there is discrimination in many countries. Immigrants and people from racial and ethnic minorities in many countries face discrimination. And we know this because there's plenty of research that use field experiments, for example, in the labor market or in the housing market, to test for this. A field experiment based on the name of the applicants basically relies on emails or applications that are sent with different names. And then this research tracks the responses that different groups get. It can be racial minorities, it can also be women in some social domains, or it can be ethnic minorities. There's plenty of evidence. And not only in these settings with economic implications like the labor market or like the housing market, we also have evidence of discrimination when people try to get a taxi or when people try to participate in politics. Also when they try to use the sharing economy, platforms like Airbnb and similar. And even dating, dating is difficult enough, but immigrants and people from ethnic minorities, they also face a disadvantage. Also, there is evidence in settings like when people go shopping to shops, how they are treated. And it is challenging, and research and science should take steps not only to, in my opinion, identify this discrimination, but also to eradicate it and to try different policies that could help to increase diversity. Now, our study, what's going on in sports? Is there discrimination in sports or not? This was our motivation. This was our main question. There's some research, and we know that ethnic minorities and immigrants are actually less likely to participate in sports, especially in these sports that is regulated, playing for different teams. And this is bad news. This is bad news for social interaction and for integration. Because of two things, two theoretical frameworks we could use. One, it's very old, is the strength of the weak ties. Because when we do sports, for example, when we played football with friends, we do this in a very friendly environment. And this network that you can create in this friendly environment can actually help you to then get a job, get a better job, or to get an apartment. And this is an implication of doing sports that we should exploit. There is also research, they exploit this idea of contact hypothesis, and it is that when you have more contact with other people that are different to you, this actually can change your attitudes and can unite people. Doing sports can actually unite people. And there are two studies that I saw here that I really like, and I was discussing it yesterday with two colleagues. One is about Mohamed Salah, the Liverpool football player, and how this player, when he skyrocketed and he became such a star, he was able to change the attitudes of people in Liverpool. Actually, research found that the crime rates decreased in Liverpool, and also hate speech against Muslims also decreased in the Liverpool area just because of one player. So that's quite amazing. That's quite powerful, and it's something that sports has. And also in post-war Iraq, this other researcher, Salma Moussa from Stanford, she did such an incredible experiment, and she put to play football together Christians and Muslims in a place where there was conflict going on, and she was able to see that these mixed teams, this diversity, actually improve the attitudes towards the other group. So with this, what I want to say is sports is a really, really powerful setting, and we have to exploit it. Also, organizations, UEFA, FIFA, even the European Union, all of them recognize the potential that the sports, and especially amateur sports, have for society. And they actually encourage all these clubs and the organizations involved to take direct action. But then, if it's so powerful, if this setting is so great to encourage social interaction, why do immigrants participate less? There's this discussion going on. Is it a self-limitation behavior or is collective exclusion? Self-limitation means that maybe immigrants choose to participate in different activities, perhaps in groups that they feel more comfortable with. And the other collective exclusion, the other hypothesis would be that there is some discrimination against them, especially within this sports club system. And this is what we try to find out in our study. In our field experiment, we try to find if discrimination plays a role or it does not. And we choose amateur football. We choose this setting for different reasons. And the first one, and probably most important, is that it's very popular. Amateur football is very popular in Europe. I cannot think of any other social activity that is so popular. And it's not only about playing football or going to trainings, it's also about drinking a beer with your colleagues afterwards, going out. It's about creating this network, right? And this is a very powerful setting. In this setting, also clubs are self-organized, and they usually compete against other small clubs in the region. They're neighbors, they're close, and there are no economic interest. This is very different to professional sports. Maybe I should clarify here for people that are not very familiar with the European setting. Amateur football is people that play for fun. This is very different to people that play professional and they get salaries for what they do. These people just play for fun. Really, it's about having fun. The system then also, they don't have a regulated system of player admission. The decision to bring a new player to the club or not usually relies on the coach, or if there is a president, or in the group itself. So this is a great setting to test our hypothesis. We do so with a field experiment with mock applications that we send via email. And basically what we do is, I will explain this a little bit more in detail later, but basically the basic idea of what we do, we just send an email to a football club, one of these amateur football clubs, either with a local sounding names or with a foreign sounding names. And then we track how many responses we get to this email. And then we compare the two groups. The emails are identical, and the only thing that changes is the name. Now, first we did a pilot study. This was in Switzerland. Before we did the whole European study, the field experiment, first we tested out in Switzerland. And here we contact about 1,200 clubs, amateur clubs. And we found already these differences. Here we were a little bit blind. We didn't know what to expect. There was no precedent in sports with field experiments. We didn't know the difference, how large this difference would be, if any. And this is what we found. We found that actually individuals with foreign sounding names in Switzerland, they faced discrimination. Here you can see the numbers. The emails that were sent with a native name, they received about 62% of positive responses, while these identical emails that only differed in the name, they only received about 55% of positive responses. So this was the first differences that we found out. And I will explain all the details now about this experiment and these emails with the European study, because this is what we did next. After we had this evidence in Switzerland and we had the pilot study already published, we got some funding, and we are very grateful to the Swiss National Foundation to trust in this area and to provide us with money to perform this experiment. I call it a multi-country field experiment. I think it's also a macro field experiment. It involves 22 European countries, and the amount of work that we had to go through was huge. We had research assistants all over Europe to help us with the native languages and all the insights about the countries that we were missing. And we were able to contact 23,000 amateur football clubs, a little bit more. So this is a huge picture of what's going on in the amateur football in Europe. I will tell a little bit more about the countries that are in our sample. Here there are 22 countries, namely we have Austria, Belgium, Croatia, Czech Republic, Denmark, England, Finland, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Ireland, Italy, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Russia, Serbia, Spain, Sweden, and the Netherlands. In total, as I said, it's more than 23,000 amateur football clubs. And here you can see there's also a little bit of an imbalance. Some of the countries have close to 2,000 amateur football clubs that we were able to reach. In some of the countries, we were only able to reach about 500. And in other countries like Ireland, we were only able to reach 300. So these imbalances, we couldn't really do anything about it, but just for you to keep in mind that we have also these differences between these countries. Some countries are more represented in terms of clubs than others, but that is just not it's just a characteristic of this study. Also, then I think it's important to talk a little bit about the experimental setup. And here is Robert, where if you have any questions, something that you want me to clarify, I think it's a good moment to stop and to explain well what we did and why. The first thing that we had to choose was the names that we wanted to include in our experiment, and the names represent the nationalities. We chose the nationalities based on frequency within each country. This means that we chose the biggest foreign groups within each country. Why? Because we think that then the implications are larger. So if you have more sizable groups within a country, the implications of discrimination are a little bit harsher for these groups. And also then we give the chance to other people that want to replicate this study or take one a step further to have a clear comparison group. So for this, we chose the 3 largest foreign groups in each country. And this is important, that the population could identify as foreign by the name. There are some foreign groups that within the countries, people could not identify as being foreign. And I will give you now an example. This is the example of 2 countries, Austria and the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, the 3 largest foreign groups were Turkish, Moroccan, and Indonesian. So here we didn't have to exclude any of these groups because all of them are clearly identified as foreign by the population in the Netherlands. We did this with surveys. We tested this with surveys. And in Austria, that is the other example, we had German-sounding names. We had Germany as one of these highly represented foreign population in Austria, but we had to exclude this group because only by the name, people in Austria were not really to distinguish it as a foreign group. And then what we did, we include the next largest foreign group in the country, which in this case is Bosnia and Herzegovinian foreign sounding names. Then in Austria, we also had Serbian sounding names and Turkish sounding names. This is how we proceeded to choose the foreign names and the reasons why. Also, this is a tiny detail, perhaps not important, but if someone is interested in field experiments and they want to know a little bit more about how the randomization was done, I give you the information here. We did block randomization by region. And this means that we only contact one club once. So one club only received one of these emails from us. And the randomization by region, what it means is that names for both local and foreign sounding individuals are assigned equally often within the region. This means that we send the same number of emails with foreign names and the same number of emails with local names in the region, in a specific region within each country. This is the block randomization that we did. Next, the next important item is what did the email actually said. You can see it's a very straightforward email, very clear, and the design of this experiment it's pretty clean. So the email only said, "Hello, I would like to take part in a training. I have played already at a similar level. Could I come for a trial training session?" And then the only thing that differed was the name at the end of the email. That could be local or could be foreign, and also the name in the email address. If I give you an example, if I would to contact one of these clubs, then the email would read carlos.gomez@gmail.com. And then at the end of the email here in the test, my name would read Carlos Gomez. This is the thing that coaches and clubs could see to identify the applicant as a foreign or as a local. Then after we sent all these emails to all these clubs in the different countries, the next step was to categorize the responses. To categorize the responses, we created 3 groups. The first group was a no response or a rejection. The second group was a positive response. This means clubs that say, yes, you can come to the trial practice. And in many cases, they would also give information about the location, about the training times and how to get there. And then we had the third group that was positive responses, but with additional inquiry. This means clubs would say, yes, you can come to the practice, but we would like to know a little bit more about you. What did you play before? What position do you normally play? And so on. Here I also have to clarify in the first group, we identify no responses as rejections, and most of the responses within this group are actually no responses. I guess when people have the chance or they don't want to answer, they simply don't answer. We have very little emails with a rejection. Emails that say, no, you cannot come. This was very strange, and most of the responses were actually non-responses in this group. But then to make the analysis a little bit more straightforward and to make the comparison easier, at the end what we did, we create a binary variable, 0 for the no responses and the rejections, and then we combine group 2 and group 3, and these are positive responses and responses with some additional increase. Of course, we did some additional tests to check if there was some differences between these positive responses and positive responses with additional increase, and there is not. So that's why we decided to combine both of them. And then it comes probably the interesting part, the results, the response rates. Here first, what we have to talk about is the overall response rate of the clubs. And on average, we received 44.4% of positive responses. And this has important implication. This is in the upper range and in field experiments that do name discrimination, because here people respond a lot. Sometimes in the labor market, when the applicants apply for jobs, they don't have as many responses. So I would say that amateur football is a very valid setting to do these field experiments and to test this type of discrimination. And this overall response rate is a clear indicator. In this slide, probably the second important thing is there are substantial differences by country. Here we can see in the picture there are countries that respond in general to both local and foreign sounding names a lot more. These countries are the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Norway, and this probably has to do a little bit with the way amateur football is structured and the access of these football teams, the amateur football teams, to websites or to the national federations websites and how developed this system is. And then we have other countries that do not respond as much in general. So we have countries like Serbia, Portugal, Russia, Italy, or Greece, when we receive a smaller number of responses in general. And again, this probably has to do also something with the way amateur football is organized and structured in these countries. But perhaps the most interesting results here is when we compare the yellow lines with the blue lines. Blue lines are the foreign sounding names, and the yellow lines and the native or the local sounding names. And here we can see that in every country, the yellow line is higher than the blue line. This means that in every single country, local names receive more responses than foreign sounding names. If we want to put numbers to this, on average, in all these countries, individuals with foreign sounding names, they get about 39% of positive responses, while individuals with local names, they get 49.5% of positive responses. So here we have a difference that is about 10 percentage points difference. And this is the next thing to analyze, these differences by country. And this is this was the whole idea of our study. How big is this difference in the different countries and how we can compare? As I already mentioned, the pool difference on average in all these countries, the difference is 10%, about 10%. But of course, there are countries that do discriminate more than other countries. So here, for example, we have in the upper range, Austria, Hungary, and Croatia. These are countries where the difference between the responses to local and foreign sounding names go up to 20%. And then we have other countries where the differences are a lot smaller. These are the case of Ireland, France, or Portugal. Here, the differences are lower. It's about 4%. Still, there is discrimination against the foreign groups, but the differences are a lot smaller. In the rest of the countries, yeah, they all range somewhere between 5% and 13%. So these are the main results of our study, of our field experiment. Of course, to test all this a little bit more on paper and with some econometrics. So we had some regression models in the papers that you can see. I will not talk too much about it, but here basically we can see the same that we were talking about before, the number of clubs that we contact and the difference, which is about 10%. And then we include some other factors in these regression models that could, to some extent, have an influence on the response rate, which shows net migration or population. But mainly, we also included these factors in the regressions to check that our main variable here, our main factor didn't change much. And we can see that when we include these new variables, these coefficients here, they're very similar. So this difference is robust. These results are very robust, and there is nothing that we could include here that would change these differences. And here, for example, we can see that the net migration, this is the surplus of immigrants in one of these regions. This can increase the response rate to both locals and foreign sounding names. It's just anecdotal results that I also wanted to share with you. Now, the results were surprising. They were striking. We expected to have discrimination, but perhaps not that systematic in all countries. And this got the attention of course, media and newspapers, especially in the German-speaking countries. So there were many newspapers that were interested and reported the results. Here, for example, Blick or Spiegel in Germany, or a Neue Zürcher Zeitung here in Switzerland, or also the Standard in Austria. And I wanted to share this with you because it is interesting, perhaps, for the discussion later. This report got up to 700 comments when the journalists decided to share the results of the study. And I checked out of curiosity what these comments were about, and most of them were negative comments of people stating, but why would amateur football clubs want to include foreigners? Why is this a good idea? Why they should do it? We have already too many. So I could realize it was, for me, a way to see that what we did was real, and why it could explain to some extent the results that we got in some of the countries, and that it made sense. Also now, given this visibility in the media that the results got, I would like to share with you now to talk a little bit more about what we can do next, because this was like the first step of our research. So here we found discrimination, okay, that's very important. So we were able to provide a full picture for the first time about discrimination in sports, in this amateur football. but there's a lot of research to nest, and the important implications and the next studies, in my opinion, should be on the solutions, what we can do to improve these numbers and to make these differences smaller and smaller in all these countries. Yeah, the opportunities, there are different windows of opportunities for research to know more about this. The first one maybe is the intersectionality. This means there are some factors that are associated with a foreign name that play a role. For example, religion. When we associate a foreign name with a certain religion, this might have an impact, for example, with Muslims in some of the countries. And in our study, we were not able to test this directly. So there are a lot of research that we could do to know more about the specific groups in the specific countries and how they are discriminated against in these sports. Also, of course, the language. Our email was perfect regarding grammar, but there might be the case that immigrants do not have the same language skills, and these emails could have some typos. This kind of stuff we could also test and test the influence that this has. Also, of course, gender. In our study, I didn't mention this, but we only include male clubs. So all of these are male clubs, but what happens to female clubs? We don't know how discrimination is in these female clubs, and it's really a huge opportunity for research to do further experiments and to test. Also, socioeconomic status. Some foreign names are more welcomed than others in some countries, and this depends on the socioeconomic status. And this is something that we could put attention and also try to understand better. The implications of our study, and I also mentioned this. So, for example, if we take the case of England, maybe you are interested in this case. In England, so we had Polish sounding names, Indian sounding names, and Italian sounding names. We had to exclude here one group. We had to exclude the Irish sounding names because only with the name you cannot really distinguish. We had these three groups. But then the implications is one of it, Indian, is a very well-established minority in the UK for many years, while the Polish minority is less represented. And what is the implication of this in different countries? So we could also pay attention to, okay, all our groups are well represented in these countries, but what would happen if we look at tiny minorities? Of course, they are not that big of a group, but still, there are people, and we should try to understand what's the situation for them. And then now to talk a little bit about the solutions. What can we do to try to reduce this gap, to try to make these numbers better? Individual behavior, this is something that we already test. You as an applicant, what can you do to try to get a response? Because this is what you want. You want to play football, you want to get a response. What can you do? We thought, okay, what about if you send another email? After you send one email, what if you are persistent? And then if you don't get a response, you try again. We did this in Switzerland. We try with this study, and what we found is that this action of sending an additional email actually decreased the gap between foreign sounding names and local sounding names, and people that are persistent got the chance to attend the training as often as a local individual. So that's something that we tested that we can do, individual behavior. But in my opinion, I think it is more powerful coordinated actions, and who are able to do these coordinated actions? Basically, governments and institutions with competencies in football that have the chance to improve the situation. There are policies that we can try out and to test if they are effective. One way to do this is with intervention studies. We have already started this line of research in some countries, like Norway, where we collaborate with the Norwegian Football Federation. And we tested a policy that they sent an email explaining, raising this awareness of discrimination that I mentioned here. They sent an email to some of the clubs that we randomly selected, and they tell them, look, there's these research results. Apparently, amateur football in Norway is not open for everyone. this is really important for the Norwegian society. Diversity is something that we really want to improve, and we would like you to have an eye on this. And then you can test whether this is effective or not. And there are many other things that football national associations could do, and that we could create these collaborations to try to improve the numbers and try to improve diversity in amateur football. Because as we saw, there's a huge potential of football to unite people and to change attitudes. So there's a lot of research that we can do. And now, Robert, I think I talked already probably a lot, but I wanted to get you an idea of the research, and I wanted to explain it a little bit in detail. And here, of course, I give you my information. If anyone wants to contact me, my email is always there. I'm always checking the email fast. I also give you here my Twitter account and my LinkedIn account. If there is any association or people working for organizations, NGOs, who think that are interested in the results and they would like to try something, we are more than open to collaborate with them. So now I give the ball back to you, and I'm looking forward to the little discussion.
Well, thank you, Carlos. That was absolutely incredibly informative, and it's absolutely sort of deeply troubling as well to find out that there was so much discrimination relating to amateur football, and a game that should be about uniting people, and indeed has great potential to bring people together, opens a window and shines and unfortunately a light on how much discrimination there is based purely on people's names, name discrimination as it's known. Now, this has, of course, wider implications. If indeed it can and is happening in football, then it must be presumably happening in wider society. What do you think are the solutions? That because Impact International, we're about the link between human rights and business, how human rights are relevant in a business context, and how it can affect people throughout society and in many different countries around the world. If people are being held back from amateur football clubs, are they indeed being held back from wider socio-economic advantages, job opportunities? For instance, applying for a role, will people be discriminated against purely on the basis of their name if applying for a job? Is there the potential for that?
Absolutely, I think there's a lot of potential. And if you tell me and you ask me about the solutions, I think any solution must go through the collaboration between university and research-based institutions, and of course these governing bodies that actually have the competencies to change something. Talking about amateur football, we need to understand this is a setting where clubs do not have a lot of resources, so they don't have a lot of money to invest on the teams, and they do this for fun. They have all the jobs, they have all the things to do. So I think it should be here national associations or organizations that are interested in football and diversity, the ones that take one step front and decide to change things. Opportunities, there are a lot, but we need to test them first. This policy that we tested in Norway that I was talking to you about before, it didn't really work. It was not enough, simply the email to decrease this gap. So we need to do a little bit more research. We need to know more what kind of policies are successful. And for this, of course, the interaction between universities and institutions is essential.
What role do you think there is for UEFA, national governing bodies, and FIFA to get involved and deal with discrimination, which is happening? I believe FIFA is based in Europe. Of course, it's a global organization. UEFA, of course, regulates the game in Europe. What action should they be taking? And if indeed they do, if we can eliminate discrimination in amateur sport, then presumably that will filter up through society. So two questions there about the role of national regulators and international regulators of the game, governing bodies, and then of course the benefits of the wider society that we can see if indeed football can change.
Absolutely. I think FIFA and UEFA, they can play a major role, and I think they should play a major role. And they're already doing stuff. Both institutions, they have many programs where they try to help refugees through football. They are taking steps, and it's a great activities that they do, and it's really important, and they're concerned as well about this topic. In my opinion, with the international federations, and I think this is a problem we all have with sports sometimes, we are a little bit too focused on professional football. There's a lot of research on professional football. We know a lot, and it takes a lot of time of these institutions, how they organize these competitions, what's going on in there. And of course, it's really important, but sometimes we forget about this sports for all, like this amateur level. And there are a lot of people involved in this. There are many players, there are many coaches, there are many people that just go on a Sunday to watch. And this space that is somehow neglected sometimes, we should exploit it. We should take a lot more care of this. And I think this is what UEFA and FIFA could do through their research programs. They also have research programs. They should try to promote how to improve the amateur system, and how to provide these clubs with resources. So that is, in my opinion, the first thing that they could do. And also, the implications for this is huge, because, as you said, amateur football or any other type of amateur sports, basketball, cricket, whatever you're interested in, it has wider implications. These are people that at the end can offer a job. This network is really important for the people that come to the country and that are new to the country. For the immigrants, it's great to have this type of network. And I also wanted to mention is we shouldn't forget this type of discrimination, name discrimination. It does not only affect newcomers, people that just came to the country. It also affects second generation, sometimes third generation immigrants. And this is horrible, in my opinion. This is people that was born already in the country, and they are totally integrated, and they are still facing this discrimination because of the name. And if diversity actually matters, and diversity helps, as many research find out in their studies, we should try to take care and pay attention to this amateur sports system.
Do you think there's a role for government to get involved, and, for instance, removing names from CVs if people are curriculum vitae, if people are applying for jobs, to have a system where people do not put their name? Or is that just going to be masking discrimination that already exists?
Absolutely. This is one thing that that could be done. These anonymous applications, and not in the amateur system, but there's some research in the labor market in this area. I don't remember exactly the country, perhaps England, or France, where they tried this out. So they had anonymous applications in some business settings. But that is the thing, we need to test if this is effective or not, because in this research, if I remember correctly, it did actually increase the gap rather than decrease. And it was because some groups were being subject to positive discrimination. So some people, when they were evaluating the CVs, they had in mind that people came from minority groups, and they tried to improve their situation. And of course, when you blank this information, all of this is gone. And it might be the case that in some specific settings, not everywhere, but in some specific settings of the business or the economic social domains, it could actually harm these people rather than improve. So any solution, I think, must be tested first to see if it's effective, and then implement it at a larger scale.
To come back to football, what link is there, intersection between amateur clubs and professional football clubs? For instance, are these amateur clubs potentially feeders of players to international clubs, or is that just the dreams of the players on a Saturday or Sunday morning, kicking a ball about in all weathers, hoping to one day make it to represent their professional club that they follow, support actively, no doubt, and maybe even play for their national team? Is that just a dream, or is there actually a real link between amateur clubs and professional football organizations?
Well, here I have the opinion that we need to be honest and careful. Of course, this is a dream, and sometimes it comes true, and it is wonderful when you see a player that used to play on Sunday league that make it all the way to the first league. But this is the exception. This is, I think, rather difficult. So for the majority of players that they play in these leagues, it's about having fun. So for them, it's about gathering every once in a while to play some football, to train a little bit, to have this relationship with their friends. And so here I draw a line. Here I really draw a line between these professional clubs and the amateur clubs, because they are really organized differently. Of course, there are synergies between them. These clubs could eventually fit some of the first clubs, but there are two different things. And in my opinion, we should consider it like this. Professional clubs, they have economic interest as well. They have their performance is always there. It's very visible. They always need to perform. They need to get the results because they need to do well. And in amateur football, it's a little bit different, in my opinion. Amateur football is more about doing a sport, being healthy, and meeting some friends, and so on. But of course, this does not mean that it's not important, and we should take care of it also. The international associations and the governing bodies, because the potential here is huge. We talked about this dimension of contact and interaction between foreigners and locals, but it's also about being healthy. Making the amateur sports system better, improving the system, would also lead to a healthier population. And this is also something that we need to encourage, is in both the national associations, but also the governments in the different countries. Why not? By improving this amateur sports system, we are making a lot of things better.
There was during the pandemic, there was a focus on how people of minority ethnic backgrounds were perhaps more susceptible to COVID, or at least actually suffering more perhaps than those what we would describe as those coming from the native or indigenous sort of population of various countries. I think that was quite uniform. So there's another aspect here about how there's direct health implications for those of different backgrounds. And of course, as you mentioned, it's not just those who are necessarily recent arrivals. It could be second or third generation people who have been in the UK, and that's likely that that there is discrimination against them still, because as you mentioned, the names that you chose are from large ethnic minority groups within each country. So the chances are is that many people would be of a background that is of one that's still born in this country, and their parents and perhaps even their grandparents may have been born in the host country in which they're seeking to get involved in the game.
Yeah, exactly. This is a group of people that is involved here is large in all the countries, and they have been living in these countries for many years. Probably they are second generation immigrants, and the implications are just larger. One thing that we don't know, and I didn't talk too much about, is the mechanisms behind this difference. So why do clubs do not respond as often to these requests, not from people with a different background? And for this, we don't have enough information. When I draw the line between professional sports and amateur sports, it's also interesting. In professional sports, we know everything about the clubs. We know who they are. We know how much they earn. We know absolutely everything. But in amateur football clubs, sometimes it's very difficult to access this information. This information is not public. We don't know who the coaches are. We don't know how well organized these clubs are. And then we cannot really explore the mechanisms behind this difference. Maybe this is also a way to work on the solutions. Maybe national associations and regional federations could actually try to improve the access to the information to all these clubs. You know, all this information, who these players are, who these coaches are, how well they play. I'm sure they would like to see themselves on the websites and how often they score goals and stuff like this. So this maybe the digitalization a little bit, or the improving the digital infrastructure of these clubs at the amateur level could also improve the outcome, and we would know more about why this happens and how we could target it. Whether this is a second generation immigrant, whether this is someone that just arrived to the country, we will have more information, and I think we will be in a better position to draw conclusions.
So through shining a light on the issue, through shining a light on the amateur sports games and the matches, who scores and so forth, then of course we are by those actions, perhaps eliminating some degree of discrimination. And of course, it would be welcome. Like you mentioned, everyone would love to see their name on a website as a goal scorer or playing even at a lower level.
Yeah, in my opinion, and this is one hypothesis that has been also been tested sometimes, and it's about visibility. I think discrimination appears more often in places that are not really visible, there where we don't have enough information. And this was tested in sports economics in some places. And I can tell you about a study that they did, some colleagues in Italy. And sometimes newspapers, they give ratings to football players after the match, how well they did. And then they compared these players that we are all looking well the games are going, Cristiano Ronaldo, Kane, all these good players, so we are looking at them all the time. And among these players, the difference in the ratings between black players and white players was not really important. Here there was not any bias. But for example, when we look at players that are at the lower range of the performance, these players that play but we don't really look too much, because they are not that important, they're not superstars. Here is where they actually found some discrimination. Here among these players, black players were always rated with lower grades, controlling for performance. With the same performance, they found in Italy in the Serie A that the journalists were actually more likely to give lower grades to these black players. And so I think visibility is important. And I think by providing these clubs, not only with visibility, also with resources. I know because what they do is really important. I think amateur sports is really important and it's very powerful. So not only visibility, but also resources. I think that will help to decrease this discrimination, and also will help researchers to know more about it, and that we could be in a better position to test our hypothesis and to see what policies are effective and what policies are not effective.
Of course, football at the professional level is a business. It's a big business. Some clubs have valuations in the billions. They are privately or publicly limited companies. Some are held privately, but indeed they have massive worldwide appeal and have a lot of revenue. There is perhaps a moral duty and perhaps a legal duty should be put on the clubs, those very super rich professional clubs, to contribute to amateur sport in a way that you've set out to eliminate discrimination and make sure that the game is healthy. And presumably these professional clubs would have human resource advisors. They would be subject to policies and audits and would be aware of any discrimination that indeed could be taking place. Perhaps it still even goes on at the professional level, but they should be more able to deal with any problems should indeed they arise. But there's often been said that there's a problem in the game at a professional level because there's less black or ethnic minority managers than there are. Perhaps that will change over time. But it's very interesting what you say about the discrimination shown in Italy towards footballers who are black, even from journalists, and rated lower. That's absolutely quite surprising and indeed somewhat shocking. To come to looking back at the report and the instances of name discrimination, how much do you feel that, because you've touched on what the factors may be, how much do you feel it could be that it may just be someone favouring someone from their own background? We've seen in England, in a part of England, county known as Yorkshire, where there was a very diverse difference in the game of cricket, a very different game to football, I must say. With the game of cricket, there was, until relatively recently, a divergence between white British players in Yorkshire going into the Yorkshire cricket team and those of what we'd describe as an Asian background, mainly sort of Pakistani or Kashmiri or Indian, who would be just as fanatical, just as supportive of playing the game of cricket, but wouldn't have the opportunity to get in to play for Yorkshire. That is, I believe, has now changed, but would have their own leagues in some instances and their own clubs. And there was this racial divide that did exist, probably not anymore, but that's to be evaluated. How much of it could be that just people favouring those of their own background without meaning to discriminate, or are they two of the same thing?
This is a very good point. About this, in our study, we know very little. We don't have the information to know this. Of course, there are hypotheses, and we can rely on what previous research found to talk a little bit of this. There's part of discrimination that is explicit discrimination. This is people that have preferences that they would like to prefer with other people from their same background. There is also some implicit discrimination. Here in these cases, and in my opinion, it could also be a problem of information. In economics, sometimes they refer to this as imperfect information problem. When you don't have enough information of the people that is asking you to join a training, you might actually feel more comfortable with people that are closer to you in terms of skin color, in terms of nationality, because you think, or you may think, that these people are closer to you in values, or they understand, in this case, football the way you do, or it would be easier for the teammates to play with other players that come from the same background. This we don't know. There are many things that could play a role on why people within these clubs they choose not to respond to foreigners that often. And perhaps through qualitative studies with surveys, with interviews, this could be something interesting for future research as well to know more about. And in this case, I think all these amateur sports very similar: football, cricket, basketball. At the end of the day, at this level, these people play for fun. It's just to practice sports and to play for fun. And we did this in amateur football because it's everywhere and it's huge, and we could find many clubs. But I think something very similar could be happening in cricket, for example, basketball, tennis, any sport that we could think of. And of course, in other social activities, I don't know, I'm not familiar with the topics, and I don't know the structures of these settings, but I can imagine this would also be a thing in theater clubs or in reading clubs, that they gather to read a book, and in a small in the difference, and also going on here, but we don't know enough yet about the whys, why this happened, what's going on.
Thank you. About the sport in general, do you feel that football and sport is becoming more politicized? Is that something that you welcome? Is that something that will lead to more positive outcomes in terms of discrimination? How, sport was once sort of seen as being outside the realm of politics, and only in the most extreme cases would there be international boycotts of countries, notably South Africa, through the time of apartheid was boycotted by many sports people and many sports organizations, and internationally. Now, of course, boycotts are far more prevalent, and indeed something that's been called for. But sport and politics seem to be very closely linked. Once it was seen as being something that was other, and politics shouldn't get involved. Now it seems that politics should get involved in sport. What's your opinion?
Well, this question it goes a little bit beyond of my expertise and the scope of my research. I don't have a lot of knowledge about politics and so, but I can speak with you about this as a follower, as a person that watches professional sports from time to time. In my opinion, I think politics and sports, we should also try to draw a line here. I think making sports political is not always a good idea, in the sense that you can actually also divide people within sports with these extreme cases. But of course, as long as politics can help sports in these topics that we were mentioning, and diversity, increasing visibility of some people, bringing justice to some countries, improving the conditions of some people in some other countries, all of this is welcome. And of course, politics, I think they have a major role, and they have to take part in these goals of improving diversity, on improving the conditions of the country. In the different countries, for example, in the European Union, they have the competences in amateur sports and so on. They have the chance to regulate these leagues. They have the chance to improve these conditions, and they should do it. So politics should try to help sports as much as they can to make it a fair play, to a fair place, to make it a setting where everyone is welcome, where interaction can happen, and at the same time that you can feel safe, that there is not any threat for you to participate. There will not be people looking you down and stuff like this. So as long as politics can help of these outcomes, and they should take part. But at the general level and the professional level, I don't really have an opinion about this because I don't know. I don't know enough.
You've spoken about the damage that discrimination can do to a society, a large section of the population being denied opportunities for health to integrate. What changes would you like to see come from your report? What would be the goal that you'd be looking for, that you'd hope to achieve?
Of course, in our study we include so many different countries that is quite difficult to bring changes in the short term to all of them. But we are working now in collaboration with some of these associations to test policies that are effective to reduce this gap. And I will be very happy and I will be very glad if we are able through our research to make this gap smaller in any of the places. And a good thing, a positive thing about this setting is that we can extrapolate the results because the system is very similar in all countries. So the way amateur football works in these countries is very similar. So once we find something that works in one of the countries, of course, culture is different, people are different, but I'm confident that once we find something that works and that make it easier for people with a foreign background to join these teams, I think we could be able to extrapolate this to all countries. And this is our ultimate goal. This is what we started this research in the first place. And I can't see this happening from day to night, but I can't see a medium term or long term goal happening. And this is what we are focusing now our research on.
Great. Well, it'd be a pleasure to work with you on bringing that about, and it's an honor to be involved. What's next for you and your team? What issues would you be looking to tackle next?
We are working, as I said, with these national associations. We are trying to build collaborations and relationships with them, and to test these policies, if they are effective or if they are not effective. We are also working next in the intersection that I talked about as well, with what happens with these names that are associated with religion. How do we see names in different countries, this hierarchy of the nationalities? There are some nationalities that seem to be preferred than others. So immigrants from some countries are more welcome than some other immigrants from some other countries. So we're also working in South America to perform an experiment where we can shed light on this issue. And this is what we are doing next. This is what we are spending our time these days.
Great. Well, thank you, Carlos. That's been an enlightening study, and thank you for your research and for giving us the opportunity to talk to you about it. All at Impact International for Human Rights Policies are incredibly honoured to be a part of your important work and promote it and spread it to other people and take this forward, because it seems we have a shared goal that we want to make sure that our societies, our businesses, our human rights in Europe are a lot, and indeed around the world, are reformed, are open to other people from all backgrounds, regardless of their background, should have the same rights and chances in society as everybody else. So I think we can end it there. If there's anything you'd like to ask me, for instance, then please feel free. Otherwise, look forward to talking to you in the future about the next stages, about what we're hoping to achieve.
I wanted to say thank you, Robert, and thank you to all the Impact International community for your interest in our research and for giving us the chance to discuss it. we are always very open to talk about this research and about these topics. And as you said, we have common goal. And if I can do something here to say bye, try to promote this collaboration. If we can do it, we should do it. Try to bring universities and governing bodies and institutions together to try to make this happen, because it's complex and it requires time and resources, but I'm sure we can make it happen. So thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.